Good afternoon, everybody. I would ask those of you who are still standing to take a seat, if you can find one, unless you're a photographer. Welcome very much to this special event, 4 years of Russia's war on Ukraine, reinforcing European support for Ukraine's victory. I would really actually wish that we weren't here today. I wish we weren't marking the 4th anniversary of the war, and I dearly hope that we definitely won't be here this time next year. Now, before I start, I would like us to have 1 minute silence to remember all of the Ukrainians who have died during this dreadful war. Thank you. Thank you very much. As I mentioned, the war in Ukraine is entering its 5th year. Ukraine really needs Europe to up its game and to actually act like the superpower that it is, because Europe is a superpower. Yes, Europe has given Ukraine important support and has gradually increased this support. And this, of course, is welcome and crucially important. But at the same time, it's far from enough to deliver a battlefield victory for Ukraine. The end of US aid has also been a big blow, and Europe must effectively fill this gap, whether they want to or not. I mean, there's no choice in the matter. Europe is at war, and Ukraine is Europe's front line. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians have died to prevent a Russian advance, to prevent Russia for coming further into Europe. And the outcome of this war will decide Europe's future. Russia can be defeated. I mean, we often seem to live in a world where we think Russia is undefeatable. But Russia can be defeated. After 4 years of war, Russia has actually only achieved very incremental territorial gains on the battlefield. This has led, of course, to the Russians now carrying out never-ending attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure as a way to try and break the will of the Ukrainian people. Of course, they can't break the will of the Ukrainian people, but still Europeans need to do more to prevent these sorts of attacks. Now, if we look at Russia, Russia's economic and social weakness is so profound that it would be unable to sustain its war, actually in face of a more unified and determined Europe. Indeed, as the piece by the Atlantic Council puts it today, Putin is trapped in a war he cannot win, but dare not end, because he knows that would be his end. And I think that it's important to remember that Russia can be defeated. But Europe needs to find a way to act in a way that is more effective. And sidelining those that don't play ball is crucial. Unfortunately, we've seen that again in the last couple of days with the failure to pass the 20th sanctions package or to deliver the promised 90 billion to Ukraine. I mean, this is a major crisis, and it's very unfortunate that it happens on this anniversary. Putin is counting on Europe not going the distance, and he must be proven wrong for the sake of all of us, but first and foremost, Ukraine. So thank you all for coming today. We have a great event for you, which is going to be split into 2 panels. I want to first and foremost thank the presidency of Cyprus for their support, and the presidency of the incoming Irish for their support, along with Member of Parliament Sandra Kalniete, who is a very long-time supporter and friend of Ukraine, and she's dressed very appropriately today. I also want to thank Ambassador Chentsov for his enduring engagement with EPC. He seems to be here almost every week. So thank you, Vsevolod, and it's great to see you here today. And that's sort of the introduction to the first panel. Ambassador Chentsov, Minister Marilena Raouna, Deputy Minister for Europe of the Republic of Cyprus, Byrne, Minister of State for European Affairs and Defence from Ireland, and Sandra Kalniete. So welcome to all of you. We are going to run the show as follows. I would ask each one of you to come and make your initial remarks from here, and then take the seat here. And then we will have an exchange with the audience before moving to the next panel, which will be moderated by my colleague Iana, who's standing at the back. So I invite you, first of all, Ambassador Chentsov, to come and deliver your initial remarks. And I will move out of the way.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and many thanks to EPC again for organizing it. Organizing this event exactly on the anniversary of Ukrainian resistance to the Russian aggression. And many thanks, ministers, ambassadors, for supporting us and devoting your time to reflect, and not only to reflect, but also to think together what we can do better to bring peace, to bring our victory closer. So those 4 years, personally for me, they passed very, very quickly. So I feel like that it happened like yesterday. Russian brutal aggression, and nobody believed that Russia would really attack Ukraine with the aim to actually destroy our country. We were thinking about Russia eventually would try to get more territories on the east, maybe to reinforce their position and to create a corridor to Crimea. But this type of war was unthinkable 4 years ago, and I think not only for Ukraine but also for all people here in Europe. And when we look back, what kind of goals Putin set for himself, for Russia, during this infamous speech on the day before, actually on the day of the aggression, what we managed to achieve is tremendous, because Putin failed to achieve any goals. Kiev for 3 days, Ukraine during 2 weeks, a puppet government in Ukraine, Europe inactive, hesitant, frightened to take any action because of economic dependence. Nothing happened. To the contrary, Ukraine, new Ukrainian nation is born, strong, resilient, new Ukrainian army capable to withstand much bigger aggressor, much bigger economy, is there. Ukrainian defense industry built almost from scratch. Ukraine, and I think this is one of the most important achievements. Ukraine is functional as a state. Take a financial system, tax system, we managed to keep our transport infrastructure. Our rains sometimes they run better than somewhere in the capitals here. So this is a phenomenon. The country in war for 4 years, but still open for business, still even doing new interesting things. Take in the IT domain or school nutrition. So I think Ukraine became a phenomenon of resistance, a phenomenon of creativity, but also I think Ukraine brought to Europe, to the European Union and broader, this spirit of strength, of again, of resistance to dictatorship, to tyranny, and feeling of purpose. Today, I think many of you were present during the discussion in the European Parliament, and the division is very clear. So we have quite a few political groups, rather in the center of the political spectrum, strongly supporting Ukraine, and we have extreme right and extreme left political forces actually using Russian propaganda. And I think it's not a wake-up call. It's a stand-up call, because as somebody recently said, sorry, I don't remember who, that Europe is waking up, but it needs to stand up. So this is a time really to, as the title of our event says, to reinforce European support, but not only for Ukraine's victory, but for European victory. I would rephrase the ending of the title. And I think it is doable, in spite of all difficulties, what unfortunately Hungarian government is doing these days, and other difficulties, not only in Europe. I think psychologically, morally, but not less important, economically, Europe feels much stronger now, and the necessary legislation is there, necessary funding is there, and political will is there. What we need to do, we need to join forces to really focus on concrete things. We understand very clearly what we need now in Ukraine. We need air defense. We need to achieve what we plan to do in the drone domain during this year. We are talking about 9 million drones. We need to develop our long-range capabilities to strike Russia deeper into their territory. And definitely, we need EU support and support of our partners to hit Russia economically. It's about 20th package to be finally adopted, but it's also about willingness to implement the sanction packages adopted so far, because we have already acquired a broad arsenal. We have a good toolkit, so the implementation is what we need to concentrate on now. And definitely 90 billion loan. Somebody made a good point today. If Hungary doesn't want to finalize this 90 billion decision, why not to get back to the reparation loan and to get Russian assets used to raise money for Ukraine? It's even bigger sum. We are talking about 200-something billion. But jokes aside, if there is a will, there will be a way. So again, I'm sure we can really push Russia into the negotiated solution. But the only thing is, Russia needs to choose to choose the negotiating table and not to continue this war. So far, this war is convenient for Putin regime. Yes, they have difficulties, but they are on drugs. And this drug is called war. To keep the society under control, to steal what is not stolen from the state budget through military procurement. But we need to get Russia out of this drug, and only persistence, only our joint efforts and political unity will help us to achieve this. So thank you again. Slava Ukraini and glory to Europe.
Thank you, Ambassador. I would now like to give the floor to Minister Raouna. Thank you. I think you meant dream work is teamwork, basically, yeah?
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for those compelling remarks. I'm absolutely delighted and honored to be with you today, with my great colleague, Thomas, with the honorable member of the European Parliament. And thank you very much, Amanda, for the invitation and for putting together today's event. And today, exactly to this day, we mark 4 years from the day when Europe very abruptly woke up to war again on its soil. And we also woke up to a new geopolitical reality for Europe and to a new continent. When Russia launched its full-scale war of aggression against Ukraine, violating the sovereignty, the territorial integrity, the independence of a sovereign European state, in blatant violation of the UN Charter, I think it's as if an illusion was shattered in Europe, that perhaps we took peace and stability for granted. We also woke up to the reality that there are no frozen conflicts in Europe, and Cyprus knows that all too well. Our message today and every day to the Ukrainian people is very clear and very simple. And that is that we stand by the side of the Ukrainian people who have proven remarkable resilience. And I had the opportunity to visit with President Christodoulidis ahead of our presidency Kiev in December, and we were truly in awe of the resilience and the bravery of the Ukrainian people, and how stoically they are resisting and fighting this war of freedom. And despite the challenges that there may be at times in Brussels, I think there is a very clear line of support for Ukraine, not only for now, not only for the past 4 years, but as a number of member states also stated today at the General Affairs Council, for as long as it takes. It's very clear that this war is first and foremost, of course, about Ukraine, but it's not just about Ukraine. It's about whether rules-based international order still matters. It's about whether this international order, as we know it, post-World War II, can withstand aggression. Because we know that if aggression is rewarded, and this is not just in the case of Ukraine, it's about any case where we have aggression and violation of international law, every time it's rewarded, our global security is weakened. Our collective security is weakened. And so Ukraine is fighting a war also for our security, for European security, for the core principle that force can no longer redraw borders in Europe, and that if this core principle falls, then everything we know becomes negotiable. And that's a very dangerous, slippery slope. Cyprus knows the fight that Ukraine is fighting all too well. From our corner of the European Union, on the southeastern frontier, this presidency of the Council is exercised by the last member state that is still under occupation, over 50 years of military occupation of territory, which, by the way, is European territory, because when Cyprus acceded to the European Union, it acceded in the entirety of its territory. I heard the ambassador say that 4 years ago, when the invasion happened, it seems like it's only yesterday. And the same is true, actually, when I heard him say that, it resonated. The same goes for Cypriots as well. And this is 50 years on. So we know from firsthand what prolonged lack of security means for a country, for a people. We know firsthand what displacement, what forced displacement means, what missing persons mean. And so it's no coincidence that support to Ukraine on all fronts is the top priority of the Cyprus presidency, and one that we started working on from day one of our presidency. Not in an abstract way, but in very concrete ways. We have advanced work to enable the disbursement of 90 billion financial package to help cover Ukraine's most urgent budgetary needs for 26 and 27. And we have also worked tirelessly within a space of a little over 2 weeks on the Commission's proposal for the 20th sanctions package. And this is a package that we need to remember that it's far-reaching, it's innovative in many of its aspects, and you talked, Ambassador, about how important it is when we're talking about our tools of support for Ukraine, to look at the implementation of the existing sanctions packages. We have 19 sanctions packages, and for this key tool that we have at our disposal that has been effective, we know that there is circumvention of sanctions. We know which countries circumvent sanctions. And it is of vital importance that we exert maximum pressure to effectively address circumvention. And this 20th package of sanctions has the anti-circumvention dimension. And while there may be challenges, both with regards to the 90 billion financial support and also with regards to the 20th package of sanctions, I will argue that this is not the first time that we have come across these kinds of challenges. We have nonetheless delivered in our support to Ukraine. And we will continue working as presidency together with the President of the European Council, with all member states, maintaining dialogue in order to find the way forward in a timely manner, to allow also for the timely disbursement of the 90 billion assistance in accordance with the timeline that we had set, which is April. And then at the same time, we recognize and continue the support to the international efforts, to the US-led efforts for a viable and credible peace for Ukraine, and one that the European Union not only stands ready to contribute, but that it must contribute to, because the peace plan for Ukraine directly impacts and concerns the European Union. And yesterday, the foreign ministers at the Foreign Affairs Council discussed this point, how important it is for the European Union to create the conditions to be at the negotiating table for a peace deal for Ukraine, one that respects the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, and that is in line with the UN Charter. Our support to Ukraine is, of course, about today. It's about how we continue support for Ukraine as long as this war of aggression continues, but it's also about investing in Ukraine's future. And I strongly believe that our strength as a European Union lies, and has always laid in our ability to transform hope and even crisis into progress. And Ukraine, despite fighting this war, has made progress in its accession negotiations. You have persevered and advanced reforms on judicial independence, on anti-corruption, on public administration. And this determination is both remarkable and at the same time deserves our continued support. And as presidency, we have placed enlargement at the heart of our priorities, recognizing that it's our most successful foreign policy tool. And the Russian aggression against Ukraine has been a catalyst in creating a renewed momentum in enlargement, one that we need to seize. It will not be perpetual. A window has opened, but we need to seize it. And we are working as presidency to ensure for Ukraine, but also for other candidate countries, that the enlargement process remains credible, it remains strategic, it remains merit-based, and that where our partners deliver, we deliver as well as a European Union. Ukraine is ready to open Cluster 1. It fulfills the necessary preconditions. We are continuing until the necessary consensus develops among the 27. We are working on front-loading Ukraine's, but also Moldova's accession negotiations. And so these aim to prepare the ground for accelerating the process once the political deadlock is lifted. We have enhanced engagement during our presidency with Ukraine when it comes to the enlargement track. We have the chief negotiator and deputy prime minister, Taras Kashka, presenting at the council working group at Coela. He's already appeared twice in order to inform member states of what progress has been achieved. At the same time, the Cyprus presidency plans to present to Ukraine the outcome of the technical work on preliminary draft common positions for 3 clusters, that is clusters 3, 4, and 5, at an informal ministerial that we have planned that will take place next week at the informal General Affairs Council in Cyprus. My message is that Ukraine can count on Cyprus to be a consistent partner and an active advocating for its European path. As a small island nation that joined the Union 2 decades ago, as I said, with part of its territory under occupation, we know how transformative and catalytic the accession process can be. And we know how vital solidarity and perseverance are along the way. And, Ambassador, when you say, and President Zelensky mentioned this to President Christodoulidis when the visit took place in December, that Ukraine sees its place within the European Union as part of its security guarantees for the future. And that is very much also how Cyprus viewed its accession for the European Union. We understand that very well. I will end here. I will thank once again for the opportunity to have this discussion. I really believe that the war in Ukraine, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, has created a defining moment for Europe's security. And the central message of the Cyprus presidency is a European Union that is more autonomous, that is able to act independently whenever necessary and cooperate whenever possible, a Europe that is open to the world. And in that equation and in that vision, a Ukraine that is an integral part of Europe is an indispensable component. I thank you very much, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Minister. I'd now like to give the floor to Minister Byrne.
Thanks very much. Thank you, and thank you, Your Excellency, Ambassador Chentsov, my dear colleague, Marilena, Minister Raouna, Deputy Member of the European Parliament, Kalniete, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Today is a terrible anniversary, really. It's 4 years, of course, since Russia carried out its unprovoked, its unjustified, its full-scale, its illegal war of aggression, invasion against Ukraine. And indescribable suffering has been inflicted upon the people of Ukraine ever since. And Russia alone, through its actions, has brought large-scale conflict back to European soil. Last year I visited Odessa with our Lithuanian colleague, Minister Sigitas Mitkas, to open an underground school shelter funded by Ireland, Lithuania and the European Union. It's simply appalling that such a shelter should need to exist. And in fact, when I describe it as a shelter, that's what it's described in the briefing notes. It's actually an entire school underground, which doubles up as a shelter for people at night time and indeed for the students during the day. It's terrible that we even need that. But millions of Ukrainians have been forced to flee their homes, thousands killed, thousands more, including children, kidnapped, tortured, arbitrarily imprisoned by the Russians. And villages, towns and even cities have been destroyed in the fighting, which continues unabated. And in the face of such brutal adversity, Ukraine Ambassador continues to demonstrate outstanding courage, resolve and determination. And I would like to honour the heroic efforts of the Ukrainian people in defending their country and their freedom. Just last December, President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Ireland, and I had the privilege of joining the Prime Minister in the Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, in welcoming President Zelensky and the delegation to Ireland. And the Taoiseach said to President Zelensky that day, "For as long as Ukraine needs our help and support, Ireland will be there for you." And indeed, next month, we have our National Day, St. Patrick's Day in Ireland, and we have this tradition where all our ministers visit far-flung parts of the world, and the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister, traditionally visits the White House on St. Patrick's Day. I will be visiting Kyiv for St. Patrick's Day. I won't celebrate, but I will mark my National Day in Kyiv with meetings as a reflection of Ireland's support and solidarity with the people of Ukraine. We all want to see an end to this brutal conflict, but how we make the peace that is needed matters also. We need to see a peace that is just, that is lasting, and that does not reward Russia, the aggressor. Robust and lasting security guarantees for Ukraine must be part of any peace agreement, and I agree with Marilena that the security guarantees include membership of the European Union, security for Ukraine, but also for our own security in the rest of the European Union as well. And we do welcome the work that the US is carrying out with others to achieve the just and lasting peace, but it must respect Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. Ireland will continue to support these efforts through the European Union and indeed through our membership of the Coalition of the Willing. And I do find it extraordinary at times that we are criticised from time to time in relation to our military neutrality, including recently on the loan from the far left in Ireland, on the 90 billion loan. We brushed that criticism off. But nobody has really, I don't think, ever criticised us for attending the Coalition of the Willing. And I think the reason is, and the reason that criticism of Irish government support for Ukraine has come so late in the day, really 4 years later, is because actually the moral question is very simple. People could see with their own eyes an aggressor invading an innocent party and trying to take over their country and killing their people. So the moral question was very easy. There was no such thing as neutrality. Neutrality would have been really an immoral position when you see the illegal nature of the act, the immoral nature of the Russian act as well. And I think that's been a very easy position for the Irish people to accept and to see as very logical. But we must do everything we can to force Putin to take peace negotiations seriously. He doesn't seem to be, and he must agree to a ceasefire. We have to step up our support for Ukraine and to put it in the strongest possible position in peace negotiations. And I think we will rise to the challenge with our EU partners. We have adopted 19 rounds of sanctions, and they are the most hard-hitting sanctions in EU history. The sanctions have been damaging to the Russian economy. They have reduced Russia's capacity to raise revenue, and they have reduced, to some extent, Putin's capacity to wage his war, and those sanctions have been achieved with unanimity. And there have been difficulties at various times in getting that unanimity, but we actually have got unanimity on each of those occasions. We've had to do that. So we can achieve a lot with unanimity. So we must move ahead and work to get the adoption of the 20th package of sanctions and the loan. The loan has already been agreed by all EU leaders in December and has been approved by the European Parliament. I know that Marilena and her colleagues will be working really, really hard over the coming days and weeks to ensure that we do get that unanimity at the Council. And I've seen this at the Council, at the GAC. It's been seen at the FAC, at Coreper, working groups where discussions take place. I've seen ministers on the phone back to their capital in order to try to get sanctions over the line or to try to get agreement on particular aspects of them that need agreement. And that work will continue, I have no doubt, under Marilena and her colleagues and Kaya Kallas. We will get this over the line, I have no doubt about it. It is the morally correct and logical thing to do. And the 20th package of sanctions is really, really important. And I would say that from an Irish point of view, particularly in relation to the Shadow Fleet. So it is disappointing that the support has been held up to now due to unrelated concerns being raised at the last minute, and we are working swiftly to get that solution. But the brutal war in Ukraine continues to transform the security environment in Europe, all of our security. The Cyprus presidency is diligently working to navigate that landscape. On the 1st of July, when we take over from Cyprus, and we'll work to support Marilena and the Cypriot government between now and then, but we will, as Ireland, continue to promote and advance the security and defence agenda of the European Union. The European Union is not a military alliance. NATO is where most member states find their home in terms of a military alliance. But member states are asking the European Union to do more to help them to advance their security and defence and essentially to protect their territory and their citizens. And that's a logical request. So we understand that and we will work to achieve what the member states want to achieve during our presidency. But our security is threatened in new ways. The EU, its member states and partners have been subjected to persistent malicious activities posed by Russia. Primarily, the war of aggression against Ukraine that we've discussed, but disruption we've seen to critical infrastructure, we've seen cyber attacks, we've seen misinformation and disinformation and electoral interference, and we've seen all of them in Ireland. in different guises at different times. Such acts, though, require new responses from us. The European Union must continue to prioritise the countering of hybrid threats, including through focusing on preparedness, being ready, and the building of European Union resilience to hybrid activity, and the resilience of our citizens and the understanding of our citizens that they are being attacked with misinformation and disinformation. We must look to our digital, our cyber, our online, our energy security as well. In looking ahead, I want to completely agree with and support Marilena's message about Ukraine's European Union membership. This is crucial for all of us. It's crucial for Ireland. We will work hard with Marilena and the Cypriot presidency and take over that mantle when it is our turn. Because we believe that Ukraine's security, prosperity and free future lies at the heart of our union. And actually, it's the difference between Russia and Ukraine. The Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian people, from what I can see, like what they see in the European Union. They like freedom. They like economic prosperity. They like being able to move around. They like being able to criticise their government from time to time as well, as we all do in our democracies. And you see the contrast with Russia, where they don't have that freedom. They don't have that economic prosperity. They have a war economy, a petrol station, I think as John McCain called it, a gas station. So that's the contrast, and that's what Ukraine wants, and that's what we must deliver as a European Union for Ukraine. Ukraine has met the technical criteria needed to open all negotiating clusters. So Ukraine must be allowed to progress on their European Union accession journey, and over the coming weeks this is something, there are a couple of pinch points in the weeks ahead, and these are something that will be things that we'll be looking at very, very closely. And when Cyprus finishes, Ireland will continue their work. For 4 years now, Ambassador, your people have had to withstand a relentless campaign of Russian aggression. We've seen the extraordinary courage and endurance of the Ukrainian people as you defend your country. You fight daily to protect your freedom and the fundamental values that we all share. That's why our support for Ukraine remains as strong today as it was on this day 4 years ago, when Russia visited this conflict on Ukraine and on the European Union. And for as long as Ukraine needs your help and support, Ireland will be there for you. Thank you very much, Gurmagov.
Thank you, Minister. I now want to give the floor to MEP Kalniete, who is from Latvia, very close to Ukraine and Russia. So I give the floor to you.
Dear Ambassador Chentsov, Minister Raouna, Minister Byrne, dear friends of Ukraine, 1,461 days of Ukraine staying strong, of Ukraine not giving up. Ukraine has a lot of friends. Many of them are in this room. But I'm honestly worried that even Ukraine's supporters do not understand just how important Ukraine's defense is to our own security. Ukraine is now certainly the strongest army in Europe, with unmatched experience, the battlefield innovation and technology, and most importantly, with the will to fight and defend territory, values, and freedom. Yes, Europeans have done a lot to support Ukraine. With the US stepping away, Europe is now financing Ukraine's self-defense. But our help to Ukraine is still not proportional to how much Ukraine helps us. We must do more. It is the coldest winter in the decade. Russia's attacks on Ukraine's energo grid are the next Holodomor. It's another attempted genocide against the Ukrainian nation. Millions of Ukrainians are left without heat, electricity, water, but never with fighting spirit. Every day, I am amazed by their courage. Ukrainians continue to defend their will to live in a free country of their own. And we in Latvia understand this better than anyone. We had 50 years of communist occupation. and many Latvians perished. I myself have all my grandparents perished in Gulag. And my mother spent there 17 years. And I'm born there. I do not wish it for anyone. I am especially heartbroken by the fate of 20,000 Ukrainian children, stolen and deported by Russia. Europe and its international partners must do more, must do everything in our power to bring them home. Ukraine is and will always be a living democracy. Do not be discouraged. Ukraine will become a member of the European Union, even if one country is currently blocking opening of the negotiations. I believe it is time for European Union to adapt and move quickly. Time to be creative. Ukraine is so important for European security, it should be fast-tracked for EU membership. In a reverse enlargement process, with phasing in rights and obligations. Because right now, it is crucial for EU to send a message of support to the Ukrainian people, politically and psychologically. We must hold no illusions. Even as peace talks are happening, Russia has shown no sign it is ready for peace. No sign it is ready to stop its imperial war. Russia is trying to use peace talks to get what it cannot achieve in the battlefield. Here and now, Europe has the duty and strategic interest to do everything we can to support Ukraine's self-defense. We must arm Ukraine, give it the weapons, air defense missiles, and munition it needs. We must provide Ukraine with the deep strike capability to bring the consequences of the war to Russia. Europe still has not done enough to put maximum pressure on Russia. We must continue expanding sanctions, target Russia's oil, gas, nuclear, and financial sectors. The industry is feeding Russia's war machine. Neither have we put enough pressure on China, the main enabler of Russia's war. Without China's support, Russia will lose the war. And finally, we as Europeans, as people who respect human dignity, we should be outraged by the decision to allow Russian and Belarusian athletes to compete in Paralympic Games under their flag. Many of them have themselves fought for the Russian army. This is a barbaric normalization of the aggressor, a country that rapes, tortures, kills, bombs maternity hospitals, has no place among civilized states. They have no place in the Olympics, at our film festivals, in our opera houses, or celebrations of culture. Russia will not win this war. Ukraine will prevail. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you very much. Another great presentation. I know we're running slightly over time, but I want to give the audience a chance to put a couple of questions to our great guests here. We have the audience online and in the room, so if you could raise your hand if you have a question and say who you are, that would be great. Nobody. Do we have any online questions? All right, maybe I can just ask a question to all of you as the moderator. I mean, it was mentioned about the ongoing, so-called peace negotiations that is being carried out by the United States between Russia and Ukraine. But it's crucial for Europe to find a seat at this table. So I'd like to put the question to all of you: how can Europe get a seat at that table? What does it need to do to either get a seat at that table or make a new table for itself?
Very controversial. Thank you very much for the question, but I think Europe is already at the table, because it's not just about the mechanics of the negotiations and where it's taking place and who is really moderating or facilitating. It's about the role Europe really playing now. Europe is the biggest today Ukrainian ally. Take it financial support, take it military support, and politically. Just now, the resolution of the General Assembly was adopted, and to a great extent, because of the European support, we achieve now 100 plus votes, more than last year. In this situation, and I'm saying openly because you can check it now online, United States abstained. It's a big challenge, but we managed to keep this unity, and I'm sure that Europe will play a decisive role when we are talking about security guarantees, and what is most important, future track of development of Ukraine, which is membership in the EU, and what this membership entails. It's economic integration, it's our military and security cooperation, and talking about this domain, Ukraine can help EU now. And Ukraine already playing this role of the defense line, first defense line between Russia and Europe, and Mrs. Kalniete mentioned this, that I'm not asking for being thankful to Ukraine, but this is a reality. As long as Ukraine stays, Europe is able to develop its capacities. But imagine if Ukraine falls. It will be a completely different story. So, coming back to your question, I see no problem here, Amanda, that Europe will be involved and already involved.
Yes, of course.
So, from the perspective that the points that are being discussed for a potential peace plan involve elements that pertain to the European Union, whether that is the accession process, the security guarantees, it is absolutely necessary to have Europe on the table. It's not possible without it. There cannot be discussions about Europe without Europe. I will also agree that in some ways Europe is on the table. We need to also be honest that this is a US-led process at this moment. And so being pragmatic, being realistic, and being results-oriented, we need to work with what we have. We need to engage more, despite the challenges with the new US administration, so that we ensure that the dialogue is continuous and that for all those elements that relate directly to Europe, we have a say and we are at the table.
Yeah, I think Marilena is correct to outline the areas that Europe is involved in, whatever anyone else decides, particularly in relation to the accession of Ukraine to the European Union. Like, we're intimately involved there. Look, there are peace talks going on. We think that's positive. I wish Putin would be willing to agree a ceasefire, because I think that's the biggest problem at the moment. Not that Europe is not at the table, directly at the table. He has to agree to that. So the more pressure we put on from a European point of view, that is us at the table. Whether it's sanctions or giving the loan to Ukraine to enable them to succeed. So these talks have been American led. There are others there. You know, if President Macron reaches out to the Russians, we've no difficulty with that. We support that. Our President Stubb, who in the past has had engagements in Russia, or anybody, we've no difficulty with people talking to them. But it has to be, and it would be, of course, from any European leader, on the basis of our principles, which is a free Ukraine, a just peace, a lasting peace, and a choice for Ukraine to make its own way in the world, as they have expressed that they want to do. And that means its territorial integrity as well. So whether it's the EU, whether it's individual leaders who have conversations from time to time, we welcome any of that if it can achieve the objectives of stopping Putin. And he is the aggressor, he is the wrongdoer, he is the evil one in this particular scenario. But in the meantime, we will support whatever efforts are there and support the work of the US and keep pressure on the US as well, because they haven't matched. They have done some sanctions, but they haven't matched what we want to do, and they haven't implemented what they've talked about on sanctions as well. So I think they need more pressure too from us, pressure from friends, I would say, in this context.
I will continue where others already stopped. I would say that the European Union is a diplomatic superpower, because when we are looking back to this very difficult year we are having since the elections of American new president, on any critical moment, that was Europe who stood up for Ukraine and achieved the result. We're standing very strongly for just peace agreement against the pressure and territorial concessions. This is something where our role is probably not so visible for those who are looking for loud phrases and declarations, but all practical steps which have been achieved are with great input coming from the European Union. The only thing what I resent, that when this 20-point proposal or 24-point proposal of peace came from United States and was edited probably by Moscow, that at that moment Europe did not propose its own peace proposal, because it could be denied, but in that moment you do not agree, you criticize, but there is something feasible, touchable. And the solution what we are finding for financing military support for Ukraine, just imagine, we are spending our money in the United States, buying military support partly in the United States. So that's why I never say that Europe is not at the negotiating table. We are practically at the table and having quite an important influence.
Thank you. Thank you for all of your insights. I would prefer to really see Europe at the table, because President Putin is very comfortable with the United States. This is how I read it. He believes that he can, let's say, ring circles around President Trump because of President Trump's rather strange approach towards Putin. So having Europeans on another another seat at that table would be highly desirable, I think, as a way of actually influencing the Americans, but also showing that they're also projecting strength and are able to have a real robust role in this process, and not, let's say, sitting behind. Maybe the US likes them to sit behind, but we should be sitting in the front seat. So on that note, I want to thank our speakers, because we need to move to the next panel, and I apologize for running behind, but I'm very grateful to all of you for joining us today, to both ministers, to MEP Kalniete, and to the ambassador. Thank you very much, and I look forward to cooperating with you in the future. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for staying after a very, very interesting keynote speeches. We have the second session coming in here with also an excellent panel. My name is Iana Maisuradze, and I'm the policy analyst here at the European Policy Center's Europe in the World program. And thanks also to our panelists online and in person for joining. I think they're also on the way. Hello, hi. We will explore how Europe can maintain political unity, bridge the gap between its geopolitical ambition and its industrial capabilities, and ensure that Ukraine achieves a just peace through strength. Some of these issues have been already alluded to in the first session, but we will try to extend on that. As we mark the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the war is approaching a critical juncture amid a shifting global order. Ukraine remains unbroken, sustaining a still porcupine defense despite a grinding war of attrition, while Russian forces endure staggering casualties and remain unable to achieve a decisive military victory in Donbas. Moscow has pivoted to an intensified campaign of energy terrorism targeting critical infrastructure in an attempt to break the spirit of the civilian population. This stalemate on the battlefield underscores a defining moment of the truth for the European project. As the United States increasingly focuses on the Western Hemisphere and pivots its defense focus towards the Indo-Pacific, the responsibility for European security must rest with Europe. To overcome the self-inflicted weakness, Europe must transition from the reactive crisis management to establishing a permanent security architecture or governance. This strategic shift requires the full integration of Ukraine into the European defense industrial base, a clear path towards EU accession, and the steadfast delivery of long-term financial commitments, including what has been the failure as of today, meaning the 90 billion promise and also the 20th package. We have an excellent panel to discuss these issues today, and let me quickly introduce them to you. Baiba Tavaresa, head of the Ukraine division at the European External Action Service, and to Merit Olena Prokopenko, senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. We also have online speakers joining us from the US, Damian Murphy, Senior Vice President, National Security and International Policy at the Center for American Progress. And last but not least, Tetiana, Ostra, co-founder of Boryviter Center of Excellence. So thank you also for joining us from Kiev and Washington, D.C. We are really delighted to have you at our panel today. Before I pass the floor to our first speakers, let me give some housekeeping rules. We are a bit over time compared to what we have in our program, but I'm sure that the discussion will be very engaging. But I promise you for no longer than 20-25 minutes over time for this session. I will start with a few opening questions to the speakers, and then we will engage in a conversation before I yield the floor to our digital audience as well as the audience here in person to ask their questions, and then we will wrap it up. For the audience online, please do put your questions in the Q&A chat box and keep them short so I can read them at a glance. So without further ado, let me start with you, Baiba, about the political unity and strategic direction of the European Union. I mean, this has been also alluded to in the first session. How will the EU maintain political unity on Ukraine as domestic pressures grow across member states, and Ukraine fatigue is becoming more popular from, weakens the long-term support as well? Please.
Thank you so much. And I will start by saying, I don't feel Ukraine fatigue. I very often feel tired because there's a lot of work. But in our daily work and contacts, not only with member states, but also with, let's say, our partners. And it's just that I don't feel this fatigue at all. And not even speaking about Ukrainians who are living their daily lives countering the aggression by Russia. So I think this Ukraine fatigue is also kind of a bit blown out of the proportions thing. So this is one. I will start with support to Ukraine. And you mentioned how to ensure unity. I think it's a very pertinent question, especially in the light of current blockage of two very important decisions that we were hoping to symbolically be able to take for today, which is a very symbolic date. However, I want to note, of course, it's regrettable, but this tendency, if you look at this trend, especially in the last year, it has increased. We have quite some decisions and statements taken at EU 26, and quite amazingly, yes, it complicates things. But if you look a bit zoom out, so what decisions have been taken and what is the strategy of the EU, we have continued our strategic course on support for Ukraine. So we, especially now that the US administration has changed the approach, we have become the main provider for Ukraine's financial assistance, military assistance. So we have filled, in a way, this vacuum. We have managed to bring together G7 and G7 plus partners, international cooperation in supporting Ukraine. And that is ranging from kind of like predictable and needed, let's say, structural help to Ukraine financially, budgetary support, etc., to emerging crisis needs, such as we have seen this winter with energy situation and humanitarian situation that was induced by Russia's bombing of Ukraine's critical energy infrastructure. So I would like to say that we have delivered on that. We are delivering also on sanctions. The package is there. It's not a question if it will be adopted. It will be adopted. The question is when, and I do believe that in the course of this week we will manage. And I also want to underline what Ambassador already mentioned, the diplomatic work that we do for Ukraine, because Ukraine, compared to Russia, does not have such a strong diplomatic network as Russia does. And Russia is very skillful in pushing their narratives. And we are helping Ukraine to win this battle of narratives. And the best result is today. I'm so happy to see the voting result in the UN today, 107 votes in favor, more than last year, despite the US abstention. And I think it's remarkable, and maybe for you it seems like, okay, there's one meeting and they're just voting there and that's done. We have been working on this with all our delegations for weeks and weeks. So there's so much work invested, outreach at all levels, including highest. So there's a lot of work being done, and the strategic course to support Ukraine is being held. Not everything of this is visible, but we are on it, and the determination is very strong, and we will keep it. So what can EU do more, and notably on accession and in a longer term? As we have heard, some of previous speakers were alluding to new ideas, and these new ideas, of course, in terms of kind of enlargement policy, stem from the fact that it's not anymore 27 that can take decisions, because there's one country that is blocking accession. So this is how we ended up with front-loading of clusters and etc. However, what I want to highlight here today is the reforms. They cannot be front-loading of accession in terms of like Ukraine's capacity to be a member, although like some of the ideas that, aired kind of allude to that there can be some kind of fast-track decision and then that's it. I think reforms goes also both ways. It's not only for Ukraine, but also for ourselves, because we are not ready to take such a big country, such a populous country, with all the consequences it will entail on decision-making, on financial aspects. So I think all this debate has to happen among member states. It hasn't happened, and that's why I think it's a bit dangerous to, run ahead everything. Of course, we wish and we want, and Ukraine will be part of the EU. The question is, it has to happen in an appropriate way, and reforms are the only answer, because it's the strongest argument. Also, like when you talk to Ukrainian politicians, all of them say, we want accession tomorrow. We deserve it. We want it tomorrow. When you speak to Ukrainian civil society, they tell us, no, reforms first. And I think we owe this to Ukrainian people. It was Ukrainian people who, when they went to Maidan in 2014, some of them, and quite many of them, over 100, they lost their lives for this choice to be part of the EU. So I think we owe it to them to insist on the reforms, because they want to live in a different country. They wanted it in 2014, and they are still dying today at war because they want it. So I think it's very important for us to uphold this kind of reform-oriented approach. Then quickly on security architecture, just wanted to say, you know what, this is happening. It's not the wishful thinking. We have all this defense industrial cooperation. We have SAFE. Now this new loan on the military window, it's very specifically designed so that Ukrainian defense production and European defense industry is closely intertwined. So, I mean, it might not look like kind of groundbreaking, but it is happening. And on the loan, okay, we need this kind of final decision on the headroom of MFF, but the work is ongoing. The technical work for preparation for this loan to take effect is ongoing, and it will happen. So I think we shouldn't call it a failure. It's of course unfortunate that it couldn't be decided for today as a symbolic date, but I'm pretty confident it will happened. So we already provide a lot of current and also future security for Ukraine with our missions that we have, military mission and advisory mission on the ground. And this will also evolve into EU contribution to security guarantees in coordination with Coalition of Willing. So a lot of people are using this headline, EU is not at the table. I want to say that since Alaska, EU has been a lot around the table before, after, maybe not exactly in the room, but outside the room. So, I mean, we are quite influencing this. We have also worked on there's a number of documents involved. We have worked on prosperity document, which is part of the documents related to potential peace deal. So, I mean, EU is not absent from the process. I wanted to underline this. And we have concrete tools, and we are the only ones who have a mission on the ground, a mission. And it's not just a few people sitting in Kiev. It's hundreds of professional people who are contributing to resilience of Ukraine, and they also have offices in Dnipro and close to the front line, etc. So this is what I want to underline. And the last point I will say, we share the same threat with Ukraine, which is Russia, and we need Ukraine also for our security, our future security architecture for the EU, because we share the same threat. Ukraine has amazing wealth of experience now on countering this threat. Ukraine is much advanced on technological innovation, on warfare innovation, on everything. So we need Ukraine, and Ukraine needs us. So I think it's a mutually beneficial cooperation, and we are on it. And I think it's just inevitable that both integration processes through accession, through reforms, on reforms-based accession, and on security will happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much for presenting this kind of comprehensive picture from the External Action Service. Very much appreciated, and we will definitely come back to you about the industrial base. But before then, let me turn to Olena and ask her a question about the strategic outlook from Kiev perspective. What does victory realistically mean from the Kiev perspective today? How is Ukraine adapting to the still porcupine strategy for a long war of attrition? I mean, what is the stance there?
Thank you, Iana. Thank you, European Policy Center, for hosting this important conversation, despite the very tragic backdrop. 4 years ago today, I was waking up in my apartment in Kiev to the sounds of explosions, and it feels like a lifetime away now. But a year ago, I was exactly here on this stage, having an honor to be part of a panel discussing exactly the same issues. And back then, the peace process had just only resumed by the Trump administration. There was still cautious hope that it would bring some outcomes, some results. And today, with no peace and no ceasefire in sight, after a year of these talks, European leaders are finally admitting, which we have seen very prominently at the Munich Security Conference 2 weeks ago, that Russia is not interested in ending the war, unless, of course, Ukraine surrenders. And again, after a year of talks, after a year of all these high-level meetings and all these efforts, in fact, for Ukraine, things have only gotten worse. Not only Ukraine lost countless more lives of servicemen and servicewomen at the front lines, it also lost more territory because Russia has made very limited but still advances at the front lines. This year was also marked by the most severe bombardments of Ukraine, and Kremlin still very much feels impunity for them under this U.S. administration. We also know that frozen Ukrainian cities and towns are on the brink of humanitarian catastrophe for many weeks now. The civilian toll of the war has grown in these past 12 months by over 30%, even though the peace talks were initially launched under the premise of ending the killing, ending the assassination of people. But we see that the civilian toll has only grown. And meanwhile, in Brussels, we see the sanctions package block. We see the we see the 90 billion loan blocked. So all of this is of course unbelievable after 4 years of full-scale invasion and the peace efforts. But looking back on this year, we actually see a mixed picture. On the one hand, it's probably safe to admit that European partners are still taking a very incremental approach in supporting Ukraine. They're not ready to take more decisive and bold steps, perhaps, such as sending the troops and putting boots on the ground, but also sending Ukraine and providing Ukraine the necessary number and amount of long-range strike capabilities that Ukraine needs. For the fear of conflict with Russia, looks like this is not going to happen anytime soon. But at the same time, we see that there's clearly a shift in how the West, including Europe, perceives the war in Ukraine and the path to peace. First of all, we see a growing realization that negotiating with Russia is a dead-end strategy. And of course, now we just need to come up with a way to convince Washington this is the case. But at least in Europe, there's no doubt about that. Besides, Europe increasingly sees boosting support for Ukraine as a matter of Europe's own security and existential matter for Europe. It's not charity anymore. It's not solidarity with Ukraine anymore. It's not supporting democracy in the face of dictatorships. It's really a very visceral realization that Ukraine is the first line of defense, and Europe knows it. And thank you very much, Baiba, for reiterating again that Europe is much more conscious of the threat of Russia now than it was a year ago. And we've seen a record number of hybrid attacks all across Europe in NATO member states by Russia that made Europe much more aware of its vulnerability than a year ago. And indeed, in 2025, Europe has taken unprecedented steps to also boost its own defense capabilities in order to not only defend Ukraine, but also to defend itself. And besides, after the suspension, near total suspension of the U.S. assistance to Ukraine, Europe has become the main guarantor of Ukraine's defense effort. It's also taking the lead in supporting Ukraine militarily, not only with its own weapons, but with through their NATO's Pearl initiative, which needs to be expanded. And at the Munich Security Conference, we've heard not only the discussions of whether the initiative will stay in place, but also whether there are ways to expand it and to engage new NATO member states and allies in providing greater contributions through this important initiative, now that there is no other way to receive military support from the U.S. But this is all barely enough to keep Ukraine in the fight. It's very far from sufficient to make any progress on the front lines and to help Ukraine win. A lot more has to be done, of course, so that, as Amanda said in the beginning, next year we don't gather in the same room to discuss another devastating year of war, but so that we can discuss Ukraine's forthcoming EU membership, so that we can discuss post-war recovery, and so that Russia pays for that. It's clear that Russia's goals in this war have not changed. It doesn't want only Donbas. It wants to subjugate all of Ukraine. And the only way to end the war is not to appease the aggressor. It's not to manage the escalation. It's to consolidate and strengthen economic and military pressure on Russia. And I'm glad that today it was mentioned a number of times. And we know that for as long as Russia can afford to wage this war, it will continue to do so. And there are multiple ways how this pressure can be amplified and intensified. Of course, it's a matter of stronger sanctions, not only in the EU but also in the US. And let's hope that 20th package of sanctions will be unblocked soon. But there's also a very promising bipartisan bill in Congress that includes measures to curb Kremlin oil revenue. Secondly, it's critical to channel Russian frozen assets into Ukraine's defense and recovery. And again, I can't believe that we're still talking about it for years into the full-scale aggression. And this could be the strongest leverage that Europe has. And back to the question of how Europe can get a seat at the table, this is how. This is exactly the way to send a strong message, not only to Moscow, but also to Washington and to claim Europe's capacity and Europe's agency in this process. It's also important to develop long-term macrofinancial support mechanisms for Ukraine, because as we can see with both the 90 billion loan and with the failed effort to approve the reparation loan back in December, both of these mechanisms have fallen victim to the political environment in Europe, to the changing political dynamics, and we cannot afford that, because a month from now, Ukraine will be at the brink of a full-fledged budget catastrophe, because the budget is in a very disastrous condition, and we need those 90 billion. We need urgent support from Europe. So, in order to avoid having Ukraine's budget stability hanging in the balance every time when a new vote has to come through, it's important to develop long-term mechanisms for that. Third, it's of course critical to dismantle Russian shadow fleet, and we can see some efforts on the way. It's critical to keep arming Ukraine with layered air defense systems, with long-range defense long strike capabilities, because this is what not only raises the cost of war for Russia, but also brings the wars back to the Russian territory. Now that NATO membership unfortunately remains off the table, even though I still believe that it would be the cheapest way, most efficient way to ensure security not only for Ukraine but also for Europe. But as it remains off the table, it's important to strengthen Ukraine's security alliances with the Nordic Baltic states, with Poland, with Germany, France, the UK, that have been among the strongest supporters of Ukraine. And of course, a powerful way to strengthen pressure on Russia and to support Ukraine is to fast-track European integration, as it was mentioned today multiple times, and I'm very grateful for all the efforts to accelerate this process. Just to give you an impression of an idea of how strong the sentiment for EU accession and the demand for it is in Ukraine. A year ago, when we were discussing, when we were talking about the third anniversary of the invasion a year ago, the support for EU accession in Ukraine was below 70%. Today, it's 83%. I mean, Ukrainians are sacrificing daily for European values, for European membership, for European security, and they do see EU accession as the most sustainable way to democracy, but also to security. And it was very promising to hear Commissioner Koss state at the Munich Security Conference that Europe will find a way to close the gap between the existing enlargement methodology, which was developed for peaceful times essentially, and the existing geopolitical reality, which are completely different, and they would find a way to close that gap for the accession to happen rapidly. And yesterday we also saw that Ukraine received the list of requirements to become member of the EU from the European Union, and this means in practical terms that Ukraine has been moved into the operational phase of the accession process, even without the political decision officially. So this really shows that Europe is conscious of how much Ukraine also brings to the table, and how important fast-tracking accession is. Another reason why timing is critical is because accession would provide a strong boost to Ukraine's democratic institutions and democratic reform agenda. Ukrainian democracy is under extreme pressure, of course, due to the martial law and other challenges of the wartime. And it is, of course, remarkable that after 4 years of war, the institutions are still holding and the democracy has held up. And when you look at the latest polls, you can see that democracy is not perceived by Ukrainians as a luxury of the peaceful time. It's seen as a necessity, regardless of whether we are in war or not. It's seen as a necessity, and as there's a very strong demand for justice and for rule of law in Ukraine, because there is a clear acknowledgement that this is what we are fighting for. But at the same time, independent institutions are struggling to keep up the pace of reforms, and clear European Union membership prospects would provide that necessary framework to accelerate these efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Olena. You actually answered some of the questions that I also had so thoroughly, and you also gave us the guidance, so to say, and steps to us and also to the EU on how to approach this subject matter. But let me also bring in our digital speakers from online, and let me bridge to the to the DC now. Damian, you're joining us from DC. You're joining us from across the ocean, and you heard the United States role a couple of times already today. So maybe you could tell us a bit from your perspective, from the U.S. perspective, what are the developments on ground in the U.S. that regarding Ukraine, regarding the negotiations, the role of the United States, and how it is all regarded from there, especially having this pivot to Indo-Pacific, so to say. Thank you.
Great. Can you hear me on that side?
I think we can hear you, but maybe we could increase the volume, please.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much for including me. And this has been such a fascinating conversation, to especially hear from the Cypriot leadership and the Irish leadership during that first panel. Really important to see the leadership that they're showing across the board on Ukraine. With respect to the U.S. role, I've spent a lot of time this morning thinking about, where I was 4 years ago. At the time, I was working in the United States Senate as a senior foreign policy staffer, and we were getting briefings from the Biden administration at the time in the weeks leading up to the attack about what was about to happen. To reflect back on that time, for as horrific as it was, for as scary as it was, for in terms of what it meant for Europe and the future of Ukraine, I also felt a degree of pride in the United States. The fact that we were so forward-leaning in gathering the intelligence, to ring the alarm bells, to share that intelligence with our friends in Europe and declassify it in a way that showed the world what was about to happen, was a really important moment, for U.S. leadership. And then following from that, with the invasion itself, the rallying that the Biden administration did to help to pull together our friends in Europe for such a united response over the course of that first couple of years of the war. I remember gathering in intelligence briefings in the days leading up to the war, and the prognosis was not good. Right. I mean, I think that, across the board, there was real question as to how long Ukraine would be able to hang on. But due to the resilience of the Ukrainian people, the innovation, the creativity, and the courage, and that support from the United States and across the board in Europe, was really a remarkable thing to see. Now, fast forward to today. In terms of where we are, and I have to say that it's not pride that I feel, that it's embarrassment. And it started with President Zelensky's meeting in the Oval Office and the way that he was treated by President Trump and in particular Vice President Vance. Fast forward to Munich just a couple of weeks ago, where Secretary Rubio's speech barely included a mention of Russia or Ukraine in the conflict that's happening there. Soon after, the secretary traveled to Hungary, where all of us know in this room, is the primary block towards real progress in terms of European support for Ukraine, exemplified in the blocking of the $90 billion loan. It was mentioned earlier, the U.S. abstention in the vote today. And then, most sharply, I think it's felt in Kyiv today, where leadership from across Europe made that trip took the train ride across to Kyiv to show solidarity, and not one senior European or not one senior American official was present. So, I think to see this evolution over the course of these past 4 years, has been extremely disappointing. And, I think it's also really important to send the message that the actions of this administration, the approach that it's taking with respect to negotiations and with respect to support for Ukraine, is not reflected in the opinion of the American people. Poll after poll show that the Ukrainian people are supported by the American people, and that it's not just Democrats in the United States. If you look at the polling, Republicans across the board also support, continued assistance to Ukraine and continued support to Ukraine through the negotiation process. A couple of points on the negotiations. I mean, when serious negotiations have happened in the past where the United States plays either a participant role or a facilitation role, we send serious, experienced people to the table who are backed up by intelligence, who are backed up by expertise. And unfortunately, that is obviously not the case with respect to this negotiation on Ukraine. The two lead negotiators had no background, on the conflict, on the history, on the players prior to getting involved. And that has borne itself out in terms of how the negotiations have gone. Russia has repeatedly just bought time. It's not been able to make progress on the battlefield, so it's trying to make progress at the negotiating table. Negotiating more land in Donbas, negotiating, more than what it could ever imagine getting at the battlefield, given that the Ukrainians have done such a good job in pushing back against them. The administration has shown an unwillingness to really put pressure on Ukraine in a substantial way. I appreciated what was said by folks on the first panel that, while the administration has placed some sanctions on oil, it hasn't done nearly enough to go after the shadow fleet. Olena pointed this out very eloquently. They haven't gone after the shadow fleet. They haven't fully imposed the sanctions that are on the books right now. I think it's a really disappointing and challenging environment that we're contending with right now. Really briefly, because I would love to hear from Tetiana and her perspective. I would like to end on what hopefully can be a positive note. It's been said throughout on the first panel and in this panel that Europe is a superpower, and I firmly believe that, and I want to underscore that as well. And I think that this is an amazing opportunity for Europe to play even more of a leadership role, and they need to play more. God bless you, Olena. Need to play more of a leadership role. But that can be done in coordination with those who support Ukraine here in the United States. So there is strong support in the United States Congress amongst Democrats and some Republicans. So there's real opportunity for partnership with the European Parliament in getting out joint messages of solidarity, joint efforts on things like sanctions. As was mentioned, there's a big sanctions bill sitting in the floor of the United States Senate right now. It has more than 80 co-sponsors, and it would really deliver a crushing blow to Russia if leadership in the Senate had the courage to move ahead with that. And then the final point that I'll make is that we have elections coming up here in the United States this year. There will be midterm elections, and if the current trends continue, it looks as though Democrats will probably do quite well in the House and flip the House. That offers an opportunity not necessarily to change the administration's policy with respect to Ukraine in the negotiations, but it will enhance oversight on that policy and really get some tough questions asked of the administration, and hopefully some important shaping that reflects the views of the American people. Again, underscoring the polling that's out there, the American people do support Ukraine and want to see a more forward-leaning position on the part of the administration, especially in terms of putting pressure on Russia.
Thank you, Damian, for your perspective and also for sharing the U.S. perspective, not only on foreign policy but also on the domestic developments. So we'll get back to you afterwards for further questions about how the transatlantic coordination can continue and amplify. But before then, let me invite Tetiana to share about the lessons learned. And before I do that, let me invite you in the audience to also prepare the questions for our speakers already, also to our digital audience. So over to you, Tetiana. What are the lessons learned from the battlefield that Ukraine can share to Europe and other partners as well? Thank you.
Thanks a lot for having me tonight. Please let me know if you can hear me well. Great, thanks. As I'm joining from Kyiv tonight, present in the room is Valeria Izhik, who represents Boryviter Center of Excellence in Brussels. So please feel free to come up and get engaged with our organization. But first of all, I would like to say thank you and a big shout out for this event to the European Policy Center for keeping Ukraine at the heart of Europe's security debate. On the 4th anniversary of the full-scale war in Ukraine, this only reinforces a very critical point to all of us, that European security is being shaped every day on the battlefield of Ukraine. And I'll offer more of a security and defense-oriented perspective to this discussion, and I hope we can discuss more in the follow-up. Let me start with one operational, in military terms, observation that has rather a strategic implication. Modern war moves faster than most European defense systems are designed to adapt. Ukrainian Ministry of Defense reports that in 2025, up to 80% of target acquisitions were enabled by unmanned systems, to include very cheap and easily assembled FPV drones. Detection, reconnaissance, and fire correction are now done also with the help of unmanned systems. However, the most critical shift is not about these platforms. It is about the speed of adaptation as we go through this war. As an organization, Boryviter has trained over 35,000 Ukrainian service members and has done numerous research projects in support of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. And what we have observed is that a tactical innovation at the military units level now triggers systemic changes on higher levels, and it takes place within weeks. Furthermore, it reshapes training, industrial demand, and strategic planning simultaneously. We're fighting at a pace where it is defined by AI, automatic data flows, constant counter-adaptation. So these innovation cycles are measured in weeks or maybe months, but not years anymore. And this particularly has a very direct implication for all of us now in the context of the European security posture. If war evolves at this speed, Europe's defense posture cannot be separated from the lessons from the ongoing war in Ukraine. The most meaningful preparation happens in this real time as we're going through this struggle by integrating experience while it is still unfolding. A few weeks ago, we were there in Brussels at the European Security and Defense Conference that gathered higher military representatives in the EU member states and representatives from the European Defense Agency. And we were discussing hybrid threats in Europe, particularly the drone threats, and how we can deter them altogether. And one of the points that was consistently emphasized was that Ukraine's experience shows how tools used by Russia, and often described as hybrid in the European context, are employed against Ukraine at a much larger scale with very direct and lethal effect. And the main difference is not so much about the technology itself, it is about the intensity and operational context. Equipment and tactics are highly transferable. This means that under the right conditions, the line between gray zone pressure and open combat shifts rapidly. And for this reason, Ukraine's experience should be an essential reference point for European defense planning long-term. So learning, however, is not only about collecting reports, visiting Ukraine, being there, but Ukraine has also developed an adaptation cycle in which battlefield feedback rapidly informs industrial production, on a strategic level, operational practices, and also broadly capability development and even international cooperation as we build it together. So Europe's credible deterrence depends on the ability to adapt quickly and coherently. Integration with Ukraine should therefore not wait for formal EU enlargement, but rather defense cooperation needs to deepen now while this adaptation is still ongoing. Through structured cooperation in capability development, in industrial capacity, in training exchange, both Ukraine and Europe can strengthen their resilience simultaneously, and more focus will only benefit both sides on this matter. The security of Ukraine and the security of Europe are no longer separate tracks. They are interconnected, and sustained support does not only enable Ukraine to defend itself, as has been mentioned today by numerous speakers, but it reinforces Europe's own capacity to deter in this environment where realpolitik is our reality. And this is a very increasingly uncertain security environment, which is dynamically changing, and only in cooperation that is truly meaningful and truly reinforcing each other will we be able to deter the threat and overcome and finally reach the victory. I'll pause here with this and look forward to further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tetiana, for the information you shared and so much that Europe can learn from Ukraine. You mentioned the speedy adaptation process that is going on in the battlefield, and let me tie this back to the industrial base. How is the EU actually incorporating Ukraine about the development of the industrial base, and if it's not incorporating yet, what are the prospects of it?
Thank you. I will start by saying thank you so much, Tetiana, and I can really subscribe to every word you said. I think it is the realization of all these kind of imperatives and fast-moving targets is there. However, we have 27 member states with very different let's say, policies. We also have member states, like majority of them are part of NATO and some are not. And so we are trying to figure out EU-NATO cooperation and to align the standards, etc. So I think this process has started. There's a sense of urgency is there in the realization of how much Ukraine, from current experience, could give for European defense and security is there. But I think there's a lot of work to be done. There is already the beginning of that, and I think I agree also with the statement that Ukraine should not, or we should not, wait for full accession to start integrating Ukraine. This is already happening, as I said, because it's happening through the most ready and motivated member states. As you know, there are member states who are more involved who are at the forefront, who are developing joint production with Ukraine, who are developing production in Ukraine and benefiting from all these, let's say, inputs and feedbacks from real life, let's say, situations. So I do believe that the process has started right now. My advice to Ukraine would be pursue it with those member states who are at the forefront and gather momentum so that it comes when the moment is right. Because to quote the famous quote by President Macron, are we slow? For sure. Yes, that's one of the drawbacks of the EU. We're a bit slow, but the money is there through SAFE, the money is there through other programs, the willingness is there, and the first good examples of cooperation are already happening and on the ground. So I do believe that potential is huge. And if I was working in defense, let's say, area, I would certainly invest there because this is where the future is. Thank you.
Thank you, Baiba. Thank you. I would like to also invite the audience for Q&A session, being aware of the time constraints we have. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand and we'll get the mic to you. And please do identify yourself and the organization you're representing. It seems like we don't have questions yet. Oh, we do.
Evgen Matushenko from Ukrinform, National News Agency of Ukraine. It's probably to Madam Tavaresa. Maybe you could clarify a little bit a technical question. We heard from Commissioner Dombrovskis that the defense part of the loan, whenever it's going to be approved to Ukraine, will also be conditionalized. So reforms first, money for defense after that. But I never heard that information before, ahead of this statement. Could you please clarify whether it's true, or does it apply only in general terms to the whole loan? Thank you.
Thank you. It is a good question, but I think these conditionalities are different in nature. But I think what Commissioner Dombrovskis meant is that it is an integral part of any EU, let's say, financial assistance to any country, that there is an oversight and there's absolute kind of a need to see it from the perspective of anti-corruption policies and good governance. So these elements will be integrated into the decision-making procedure on disbursement of money. So as opposed to the budgetary window, where we, like most of the money will be disbursed under Ukraine, reform plan and certain reforms in line with previous experience of disbursements through Ukraine facility. So there you have a plan that is agreed with Ukraine in advance, and then upon delivery of reforms you have disbursements, and sometimes these disbursements are not full, pending some certain reforms. Whereas you also have other type of disbursements so far under mostly macrofinancial assistance, where this conditionality procedure was much lighter, where it was a general assessment was involved whether Ukraine fulfills the conditions or not. So I do believe that under this defense cooperation and military assistance part, there will be some kind of benchmarks to assess whether Ukraine is pursuing good governance, whether anti-corruption measures are in place, whether we are sure. It's also something that member states are asking, and it's also linked with, last year there were quite some scandals on anti-corruption, and it kind of raised many questions in member states. Some of those scandals were allegedly related to defense area as well. So there's also political request from member states for us, EU institutions, to have oversight over this. But what I want to underline is that what Commissioner Dombrovskis meant, there will not be a kind of list of reforms that needs to be done for delivery of this or that equipment. That will not be there. But there will be a general oversight of how good governance and anti-corruption measures are put in place.
Thank you, Baiba. Being aware of the time constraints, I actually want to ask a question to all of you, all of the panelists, about the concrete action that Europe must take in the next 6 months to keep Ukraine on the path to victory, and also in a bit of a longer term, what is the single most important decision that Europe must take in 2026 to ensure Ukraine's victory? So in this case, I will start with you, Tetiana, in the reverse order. Thank you.
Thank you. Mindful of time, I'll keep it brief. I think sustained support, of course, helps secure a just peace because this is it's a long-term war of attrition. Therefore, the one who lasts longer wins. Russia's strategy relies on exhausting Ukraine and testing Europe's endurance. And if support weakens, this strategy will work. If support remains steady and scaled, it changes the calculation, and that makes an impact. Therefore, my first point would be about sustaining the support, increasing if possible, but making sure that it's ongoing. And then the second point is about unity. I think it is ever more critical at this point, after today's events and what we've seen recently, political differences across Europe can create perceptions of fragmentation, which can be absolutely leveraged by the enemy. But acting as a coherent security actor, the European Union, together with Ukraine, that is what makes us all stronger. Ukraine is already part of the European security and defense architecture in practice. And the aggression we face has definitely the same source, not to repeat what has been said already. In Ukraine, it is a full-scale invasion. In Europe, it appears as hybrid pressure, but in fact, we're facing the same threat. So addressing both requires sustained coordination, visible unity, because deterrence depends not only on military capabilities per se, but also on this collective resolve. And lastly, tied to what I've just said, I think that the total defense approach that has been greatly practiced by the Nordic states, by the Baltic states, by some other European nations is a great example of how that collective resolve can be supported, and that will then result in a more cohesive and united approach towards supporting Ukraine. So that's on the EU side. Thanks.
Thank you, Tetiana. Over to you, Damian. Feel free to also bring in U.S. decisions and short and long term.
So I would make 2 points. I mean, I think it's critical for the EU to figure out a path forward with respect to the $90 billion package. I really think in a lot of respects, Europe's credibility is on the line here. After the seized funds, Europe wasn't able to find a path forward on the seized funds, shifted to the 90 billion. I think in real short order, a path needs to be found there in kind of breaking that logjam with Hungary. With respect to the United States, I think there's a lot of work that can be done with respect to the Pearl mechanism. And, it's great that it exists, given where the Trump administration has been on Ukraine. It's actually a small miracle that Pearl exists. I think more work can be done from the European side to institutionalize that, to actually build some mechanisms in there where there's real durability, hopefully expand it even more, kind of cooperating really closely with the American defense sector and defense industry. Because what we don't want to have happen is that the capricious nature of this administration's decision making, that Pearl somehow falls victim to that, and that they just decide at one point that they're not going to move forward with Pearl. It's really important to institutionalize it and kind of wall it off from kind of the capricious nature of this administration. So those are the 2 points I would make: 90 billion and Pearl.
Thank you. Very concrete and concise. Over to you, Olena.
Yes, I think for the next 6 months, it's most important for the EU to help Ukraine push back on the demands and unrealistic requirements and pressure that the US puts on Ukraine. It's important to keep Europe as Ukraine's strongest ally in these negotiations that have, as I said, not yielded any results, but unfortunately Ukraine keeps being blamed once in a few months for standing in the way of peace. So it's important for Europe to be that important partner and backer between Ukraine and the US in this case. Of course, it's important to develop long-term macrofinancial mechanisms, which I mentioned before, in order to make sure that Ukraine and its macrofinancial stability is not held hostage to the changing geopolitical reality in Europe, and also is not facing the risks of the far-right forces gaining momentum, and all of this should not be a factor in whether Ukraine survives budget-wise and macrofinancially. And for 2026, I think we all agree that one of the most important decisions the EU can possibly take is to finalize the preparation for Ukraine's accession and to make sure that in 2027 Ukraine becomes member of the EU, and so that as one of the speakers said today, that the EU is really should be really creative about this and should make sure that it finds a way to close the gap between the reality of geopolitics we live in today and the methodology that was created for the peaceful times that Europe no longer lives in.
Thank you, Olena, and last but not least, Baiba, please.
Thank you so much. So for me, it will be a very short. So accession, opening of official accession negotiations. I think that's very important for resilience and kind of reform stimulus, but also like for Ukrainian people, it will be a very important signal in the context of everything they're suffering in this war. Second, I wish we as the EU would take decisions on robust and meaningful security guarantees or contribution to those, which should be in place for either ceasefire or eventual peace agreement. And if there is such a ceasefire peace agreement, then I wish that EU would use those frozen assets for reconstruction of Ukraine. Russia must pay for what they did. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Baiba. Thank you to all the panelists and speakers for joining here today and also sharing their perspective, their expertise, their emotional stories, and also their experiences on the ground. It is a very difficult and very sad day to mark 4th anniversary already, and I hope that next year we will not mark another anniversary but celebrate victory. So thank you to our audience for staying 21 minutes over time. And also to our digital audience joining us online. EPC will continue working on Ukraine's accession to the EU, the developments, and also we will keep analyzing these issues and publishing. There is a publication that we dedicated, a compendium that we dedicated to the 4th anniversary, so feel free to have a look and take it along on your way out. What is left for me to say is Slava Ukraini. Thank you.